On today's episode of Let's Talk F1, we're discussing the Abu Dhabi post-season test. We'll also be dabbling a little bit into the Toro Rosso announcement that Alex Albon will be driving for the team. Williams have a sponsor backed by a Polish company delivered by Robert Kubica. In Formula 2 report, we've got plenty of news, including Mick Schumacher joining the lineup for next season. All this and more next. Welcome back everyone to Let's Talk F1, your weekly news roundup, if you will, hour-long podcast-ish, over here on the F1/E Reviews channel. I'm your host Dan, as always, and if you're new around here, I do plenty of Formula 1 content and Formula E content, news, reviews, opinion stuff, all that good stuff, so if you are new around here, feel free to subscribe, but most of you, I imagine, you've been here before, so welcome back as always. Today we've got a bit of a mix really on what we're going to be talking about. As always as well, I was on the F1 Word stream this week, yesterday in fact, last night, and we did have a little chat about the post-season test. We did have a little chat about Alex Albon, which is why I want to get that out of the way first and tell you about that first, that I'm not stealing any ideas or anything like that. Formula 1 content is going to be a little bit, I don't want to say dry, but I suppose it is going to be, because it's the winter now, the season's over, but I just wanted to share with you guys that aren't over there my thoughts on the whole situation. And there's a few things I didn't get a chance to say yesterday, and of course we had the news today that I'm really interested in, that Williams is going to have a brand new sponsor for next season, and we're going to talk a little bit about what that could mean for their livery. You guys know I love liveries on cars, driver helmets we're going to be talking about as well, so all that sort of glitz and glamour stuff that I love, we're going to be talking about that. And then of course in Formula 2 we got plenty of stuff going on there over the course of this week with driver transfers all over the place. But let's start with, I suppose, the main event really, the final bit of on-track action we're going to see in this year of Formula 1. Post-season testing took place this week in Abu Dhabi. We had 2 days of testing with next year's tyres and for some reason this year's tyres as well, so it was all a bit of a mix. But the main thing that I took away from this and that I love seeing, which you'll see in the next few photos on screen, we had a first real chance to see all of the new teams and their driver lineups. Shouldn't say new teams, but the new team build-ups, if you will. So on screen right now, you can see one of the most hyped drivers for next season, one of the most hyped drivers coming into this season, Charles Leclerc. He will be making the big switch over to Ferrari. Many of you already know, and I can't think if I have said it on this channel so far, but he is my favourite and my prediction for World Champion next year. I think he is that good, and I think Ferrari will make a big enough step up that they will be ahead of Mercedes by a fair bit next year. Only a couple of tenths maybe, but I can see that happening. So just to get that clear, I think this is the first time we've had a chance to see our 2019 World Champion in a Ferrari for the first time. It really was something special. He really suits that Ferrari red, and as always, and I'll keep saying, his helmet, you can just see it there just about. What a beautiful thing that is. I don't know why I love driver helmets so much, but I really do. But this guy straight away settled into the car. On the first day of testing, he didn't take part. That was Sebastian Vettel, but on the second day, he was Ferrari's man, topping the timesheets by 1.4 seconds. I want to make it clear that, testing's not really anything, but when you look at it a little bit closer and realise that's only a second off Lewis Hamilton's pole lap over the weekend, during testing conditions, that's very competitive from Charles Leclerc. And for his first ever run in that car, his first ever run really in a competitive Formula 1 car, well, very impressive from the Monegasque driver. As outside, the rain continues to pour, but we will continue on. We will fight on, and hopefully in the background you can't hear the rain smacking against my glass, against the window, but we will crack on. Lots more big stories up and down the grid. Sebastian Vettel on day one, then we'll go through day one results, and then we'll go back to day two. Day one, Sebastian Vettel was the top man. Valtteri Bottas, he did run in for Mercedes over the 2 days. Hamilton's already gone off onto his holidays, and Bottas, I'm sure he wishes he did, because he's not had a great year. Well, a great end to the year, let's say. He's had an awful end to the year, and I think he needs a big reset over the winter. Lance Stroll, he's another one who was making his debut for a team, making his debut for Racing Point Force India, third in front of fourth place Max Verstappen and fifth place Sergio Perez. So that's a really solid job. Again, under testing conditions, different compounds of tyres, different years worth of tyres. I think Stroll was on the 2018 tyres, Perez on the 2019 tyres. All a bit of a mix, to be totally honest with you. But Lance Stroll, again, a driver I think that's, I know a lot of people are going to hate this, but underrated. I really do. I'm not saying he's World Championship material. I'm not saying that whatsoever. But I think he's a solid midfield driver. I really do. And I think he'll give Perez a good run for his money. You know, Perez, many people say that all this year he's been comfortably in front of Ocon. I really don't see that whatsoever. I really don't. Yes, he outscored Ocon just about. If you take away that fluke podium he got in Baku, Ocon's in front. Ocon outqualified Perez 16-5. So that sort of shows you that Perez didn't have the best year. You know, it was fine. 8th place in the championship. That's a solid job. That's second in the best of the rest championship. But I think Stroll will give him a little bit of a hard time. More than he's expecting. And more than most Formula 1 fans are expecting. So a third place for Lance Stroll is a really solid start, as we're seeing more pictures of new drivers on screen. Lance Stroll was just the picture before this, so he has a nice black helmet. Back to my helmets again. There's Charles Leclerc once again with his very sexy helmet, and the number 16 on the Ferrari is also a interesting sight to see. 6th place, Lando Norris, another driver who was new to Formula 1, a rookie. He will be taking the place of, officially I believe, it is Fernando Alonso he's officially taking the place of. He's going to have to, I don't want to have to say step up, but I think he's a very overhyped driver, Lando Norris. He's been comfortably beaten by George Russell this year. People aren't giving Alex Albon a chance next year, and yet Norris and Albon finished very close in the championship in F2 this year. I know Albon's had 2 years in F2, and that does make a big difference, if I'm being totally honest. It makes a big difference in Formula 2. But I think Norris has still got potential, but I don't expect him to jump out the blocks like I think some people are expecting. And when people say he's the next Lewis Hamilton, yep, give him a few years, he might be. But I think straight out the gate, you need to give him a bit of time. That's what I would say on that one. Hülkenberg 7th for Renault. Pietro Fittipaldi for Haas F1. The Brazilian, we don't have any Brazilians in Formula 1 anymore. Fittipaldi as well. Gunther Steiner has come out this weekend and said he's very impressed that Fittipaldi has dropped all of his series that he had planned for the rest of this year and next year just to focus on that Haas development role. So looks like he could be starting to form some good relationships there. I'm not saying we're going to be seeing him in Formula 1 at any point, if I'm being totally honest. I was going to say anytime soon, but doesn't really look like he's got the mega Formula 1 talent. But still, it's nice to see that name back in Formula 1. Obviously, you guys know I'm a big Lotus fan. Fittipaldi won a World Championship at Lotus. Might have even been 2, but again, before my time. So I do apologise on that one. But it's great to see that name back in Formula 1. Robert Kubica back on the grid. Still the only Polish driver ever in Formula 1. Driving for Williams for next season. He's done tests this year with Williams, so it wasn't completely out of the blue that he was back on circuit, but it's still nice to see, knowing that he's going to be confirmed for next year, that he was on circuit. He was also just about in front of the other British rookie, George Russell. He went out in the Williams for his first ever run at the postseason test, 3 tenths behind Robert Kubica. Again, different tyres, different strategies, very limited running for Williams, 32 and 42 laps completed respectively. But it was nice once again to see all these fresh faces on the grid. George Russell's helmet, I don't know, you saw it a couple of pictures ago, it was that red and a bit of blue, not too sure on that helmet, if I'm being totally honest. But it's still great to see them back in Formula 1. 11th was the Iceman back at Sauber, 17 years since he drove for that team. That's a hell of a long time, and it's a hell of a special story that he is back there. Kimi's got a beautiful helmet, as he always does. I hope it goes well for him. 102 laps completed, which is almost the most laps completed on the first day. The man who finished 12th, actually, and in the final position, was the man who finished the most laps of the session, and that was Sean Gelael with 150 points. Sean Gelael, don't expect him in Formula 1 anytime soon. He was driving for Toro Rosso Honda. But Raikkonen back at Sauber, just a quick note on that. It is a bit surreal, to be honest with you. It is a bit surreal, but I love his attitude toward it. And if I'm being honest, I think if you look at Kimi's whole demeanour over the past few weeks, he has looked so relaxed, especially compared to the past 3 or 4 years when he's been at Ferrari. He's looked so relaxed, so happy, joking, laughing. Raikkonen doesn't do that, does he? So that's been a real nice thing to see. I've ordered his book of haikus, so that should be a lot of fun as well. But I just want that for note as well. That was for charity. I wouldn't actually buy a book of haikus normally, but under the circumstances, I thought, why not? Let's move on then to day 2, because I know you guys don't really care too much about times because it is testing on screen. Just thought I'd let you know. Pierre Gasly's helmet there and the number 10 on the Red Bull. Charles Leclerc obviously finished top of day 2. Pierre Gasly, the man on screen right now, making his debut for Red Bull Racing. He finished P2. I'm a bit unsure about how he's going to perform next year. I think, for me, he's the biggest unknown, if I'm being totally honest with you. He really is, because he's had a really solid year, but I'm still unconvinced if he's really at that Max Verstappen, Daniel Ricciardo-esque level. Mainly, no offence to Brendan Hartley, but he was not the best sort of comparison for Gasly. Both of them came in as rookies. Hartley was never particularly quick at any point of his Formula 1 career, even when he was in that testing phase in his younger years. So it's a difficult one. I hope he can do well. I hope he can pile on the pressure. He's a feisty character for sure, so that'll be fun to see the dynamic within the Red Bull team. But Gasly is still the one I've got a few question marks over. Lance Stroll again in P3, doing very well in that Racing Point team. So again, watch out for him next year. Valtteri Bottas in P4, 2 seconds off Charles Leclerc. 5th place, Carlos Sainz Jr., the man on screen now with his new helmet and numbers on the car. Sainz's helmet, I like it. Didn't love it at first. The grey I thought was a bit strange. But this is going to be the helmet he uses next year. Could we see a McLaren go back to grey? I doubt it because that was McLaren Mercedes, so that's why they run the grey livery. But I wouldn't mind it. So we'll have to wait out and see. I imagine they'll keep with the orange, but it's nice to see Sainz in that McLaren. I think he fits that team quite well, if I'm being totally honest with you. He's the team leader of sorts, so that's nice to see. And it's nice to see him taking the place of Fernando Alonso, although officially he's taking the place of Stoffel Van Dorn. He was 2 seconds again off Charles Leclerc's time. Artem Markelov, the F2 sort of veteran now, leaving F2 for next season. He should have got a chance in Formula 1 at some point, arguably. Maybe it should have been this year instead of Sorokin, but even Sorokin's performed fairly well in a pretty doggy car. He was driving for Renault this weekend, was Artem Markelov. He finished P6. George Russell doing better in the second test. He finished in P7. Daniel Kvyat making his 3rd debut for Toro Rosso in 8th place. Louis Delatraz for Haas this time, the Swiss driver. Again, I would be surprised if he ever made it to Formula 1. He struggled in his first 2 years in Formula 2, but Sorokin made it in, so never discount anything in Formula 1. And Robert Kubica has come back. Brendan Hartley has gone and come back, so you should never discount anyone. Robert Kubica finished 10th and 11th. Another one who came to Formula 1, went away and come back, or has come back now, is Antonio Giovinazzi. Again, I think a driver that's underrated. I actually think he performed fairly well in those 2 races he did. Okay, I'll change my answer there. I think he performed very well in Australia, the first race he did for Sauber. That second race, those 2 very similar incidents during qualifying and the actual race, was a little bit of a rookie mistake, but he is a rookie. And you've got to remember as well, I always say this, and I think people forget this, is on the Saturday morning, he was told he was going to be driving. The Saturday morning. I mean, imagine that. Imagine doing no testing in a Formula 1 car. It wasn't even the Sauber test driver. He was a Ferrari test driver. And they called him up and they said, man, we need someone in the car. Can you do this for us, mate? And you know, you don't say no to that. You really don't say no to that. So, he jumped in the car on that Saturday, out-qualified Marcus Ericsson, and then out-raced him in the race. Finished, I think, P15, P13. I mean, that was a really solid effort from Giovinazzi, that race, but I think it's overshadowed by the 2 crashes he's had. So I think that experience partnered with that solid, or these solid actually, efforts he's done in practice over this year. He's done a few runs for Haas, done a few runs for Sauber. I think he might have done the mid-season test for Ferrari as well, but correct me if I'm wrong. He's been good. And I think he's underrated for next season, and I'm looking forward to it. One of the big, I suppose, notable absentees from the test was Daniel Ricciardo, obviously moving to Renault next season, but Red Bull would not allow him to sort of leave the team to go do testing with Renault, so we didn't get to see him in his brand new gear, which I suppose is a little bit of a shame. Alex Albon as well, which actually, this is a nice little segue. Alex Albon also didn't show up to testing, but it has been confirmed this week that Alexander Albon will partner Daniel Kvyat at Toro Rosso for next season. Don't want to go over this too much, but if you haven't heard the news, I better cover it now because this is the whole point of Let's Talk F1. So who is Alex Albon? Well, he's a Thai driver, the second ever Thai driver to be in Formula 1, the first since the 1950s. He's been in Formula 2 for the past couple of seasons, GP3 before that. In GP3, he was fighting for the title against Charles Leclerc and just missed out by a few points. Those two had a fantastic scrap that season. Last year in Formula 2, went under the radar quite a bit driving for ART. Didn't impress quite as much as probably you would have expected. Did pick up, I believe, a couple of podiums, but this year in Formula 2, he's been great and went into the final round of the season of Formula 2 still within a chance of winning the championship. It didn't quite happen, but he had a really good year, Alex Albon. Multiple wins, many podiums, a really consistent season from him, and deserves a chance in Formula 1. And it's great to see as well that the top 3 drivers in Formula 2 this season have been pushed straight into Formula 1. I know you could argue that some drivers, it's a very fair argument that Esteban Ocon should be in Formula 1, probably over the likes of Russell, Norris and Albon. I think that's fair to say. Ocon's got that experience. He's been proven to be a quick Formula 1 driver. He's proven up against drivers like Pascal Wehrlein. I know some people don't rate him, but I really do. And more importantly, Sergio Perez. If you're beating Sergio Perez, then that's a solid indication that you are one of the best. And you guys know, I'm not the biggest fan of Sergio Perez, to be totally honest, but I definitely think he's at the front of that midfield, and he's a great comparative driver to see if you're one of the best, one of the sort of the middle class of Formula 1, or if you're one of these waste of time drivers. And I think Ocon arguably is one of the best, and he will be missed. He really will. So you could argue that Albon doesn't deserve a chance over the likes of Ocon. Van Dorn's obviously leaving, Sirotkin's leaving, Ericsson's leaving, all these questions, but I still think Albon deserves a chance at some point. The big question mark for next year is not necessarily the car. We know this year the reliability on that car hasn't been great whatsoever. It really hasn't been great. But something that Sean, the F1 Word, brought up yesterday is that these 2 drivers at Toro Rosso, Daniel Kvyat and Alex Albon, realistically, they're in a dog-eat-dog scrap here. And what he means by that is that Dan Ticktum, the guy we spoke about last episode on Let's Talk F1, the guy who got his first chance in Formula 2 in Abu Dhabi, didn't do particularly great, I'll just let you know. But it was fine, midfield sort of, which is what you expect for just a random throw-in. But he is Red Bull's arguably next superstar. I don't agree with that so much. I really don't. He's a good driver, but I don't think he's Gasly, Verstappen, Ricardo, Vettel level. So that sort of gives you my opinion on Daniel Ticktum at this moment in time. But he's a good driver nonetheless. Toro Rosso, Red Bull, the Red Bull Young Driver Program are all trying to fast-track Dan Ticktum into that Toro Rosso as quickly as possible, mainly because they didn't want Alex Albon. They didn't want Daniel Kvyat. They didn't really want Gasly or Hartley. All 4 of them have been kicked out of the Red Bull program. All 4 of them. Gasly, I say that, Gasly wasn't kicked out of the Red Bull Young Driver program, but arguably was very close to do so. He was in the running to take Daniel Kvyat's seat back in 2017, ended up doing so at the end of the year, but arguably should have done it at the beginning of the year. It was a very sticky situation. Gasly had a bit of a falling out with Helmut Marko. Helmut Marko ended up shipping him off to Japanese Super Formula, where he did really well, Gasly. And I think it opened up Marko's eyes and said, whoa, 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 whoa. We'll have you back in Formula 1. We'll take you back in, Gasly. It was just a joke, mate. Don't worry. But still, that's three. Hartley, Kvyat and Albon, all three of them were ex-Red Bull young drivers that all got kicked off. And Kvyat got kicked off, obviously, once he got into that Formula 1 programme, then got kicked off, so invited back. Albon got kicked off, I believe it was just before that, or during that GP3 title fight with Charles Leclerc. It's not nice when something like this comes back and stings you. I mean, I'm, again, not the biggest fan of Helmut Marko. I'm being a bit of a Debbie Downer today, so sorry, guys. But not the biggest fan of Helmut Marko, if I'm being totally honest. I think he's a bit of an odd character. But then again, it's great to see odd characters in Formula 1 sometimes. So, you know, I wouldn't want him gone from Formula 1, but I'm not his biggest fan, especially the way he's treated some of his drivers. Anyway, that's a topic for a completely different day. But I think this will be bittersweet for them. I think it will, because they would love to get Dan Ticktum into Formula 1 as quickly as possible. Dan Ticktum as well, we probably won't talk about it during Formula 2 reports, so I'll mention it now, won't be doing Formula 2 next year. He won't be doing Formula 2 whatsoever. He'll be doing multiple winter series, so he can get enough super license points to get into Formula 1. Which you'd think to yourself, well, that makes no sense, because you want to keep your two drivers for the full season next year, surely. So, a few questions being asked. What is going on there? You know, what is really happening there? Has Albon just got a certain length contract? Has Kvyat got a certain length contract? We don't really know. So, bit of a sticky situation there over at Toro Rosso. But Alex Albon, I think, has the potential to stay in Formula 1 for quite some time. Again, I'm not too sure I'd call him a top-tier driver. I think midfield, yeah, I think he could be there. We'll have to wait and see. You know, he could jump into the car straight away, a little bit like Charles Leclerc's done this year. Have a couple of sort of races to embed himself, and then excel. You know, you never know. Some drivers, Sergei Sorokin even, in fact, wasn't the best F2 driver, but has jumped into that Williams and has actually looked quite competitive. So, you never really know. Stoffel Van Dorn, brilliant in GP2, came into Formula 1 and has really struggled for 2 years. Again, I think it's a shame that he's not going to be in Formula 1. I really do. But he's really struggled. And the likes of George Russell, who you're seeing on the screen now, he could really struggle. So you never know with that jump up, because they are different beasts altogether, Formula 1 cars. So don't rule him out, Alex Albon. And I think, I've been talking about it a lot today, but I think Daniel Kvyat, I'm not very good on the pronunciation on that one. I think it's a good benchmark for Alex Albon, to be honest. Kvyat, with that experience, multiple podiums, beat Daniel Ricciardo in a season, so he's definitely not a bad driver, although confidence was a bit of a low last time he was in Formula 1, so it'll be interesting to see. I still think he's a good benchmark for Albon, I do, and if I'm being honest, it'll be a fun one to watch over the year, and especially with Dan Ticktum, if he gets enough super license points, that's a lot of pressure on both of those drivers, so it's going to be a real interesting dynamic to see. But for sure, it's going to be a fun one. Right then, let's talk about the breaking news today that I'm really interested in. Some of you guys might not be, but I think I can change your mind. So, Williams F1, there's been all this talk for months now about their sponsorship next year, because they will be losing Martini. They won't be sponsoring them anymore, and it looked like Sergei Sorokin, SMP Racing, they'd be able to keep funding Sorokin, obviously keep sponsoring the team, but no, that's gone out the window as well, because Sorokin's been dropped. So, a lot of question marks over Williams, struggling in terms of pace. So, what is going to happen? What was going to happen? Where are they going to get this money from? Well, a Polish company, Orlen, I believe they're called, O-R-L-E-N, Orlen, they have come in. Sexy little logo, to be honest. I can't show it. They seem to be a bit funny with copyright at the moment, so, you know, I just have to be careful I just thought I'd let you know. But ORLEN up on the Williams website. I've retweeted it as well on Twitter. So if you're not following me on Twitter or you fancy follow me on Twitter, of course, that is in the link below as well. But Orlen, they have come in. They will sponsor Williams next season. Their logo is red. The eagle on their logo is red. I think we could see a very different looking Williams next season. So, Polish company, they have come with Robert Kubica. Obviously, this makes sense for Williams. Probably part of the deal to bring Robert Kubica, to be totally honest with you. The only pole in Formula 1 ever to race the only pole on pole, the only pole to win a race. So, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Williams, who need a sponsor, makes sense for them. It makes sense for Orlen to come in, benefit from this story massively, and it has been confirmed that Orlen will, or PKN Orlen, as they're officially called, will have branding on the rear wing, the front nose, the intake system, and both mirrors of the FW42. Already confirming what the car's going to be called next year, but I'm pretty sure we knew that. And their logo will be on both of the driver's helmets and mechanics overalls and all of the team kit. So, is this as big a sponsor as Martini? Well, I think it is. I think this is an almost replacement for Martini. For full disclosure, this isn't an official, I suppose, title sponsor. That's the word I'm looking for. This isn't an official title sponsor for Williams, so they won't be called Orlem's Williams Racing. They will just be called Williams Racing. There's still a chance to bring in a title sponsor, but what it looks like is that this deal is going to be very similar to the BWT deal that is over at Force India, and I have a sneaky suspicion we could be seeing a red Williams, or at least a Williams that is white with some red in it. So that's really going to be fun to play with for next season. I think as well, with Kubica and Russell already having red helmets, already is starting to show the links to that as well, although both of them respectively have run red helmets anyway over the year. But it's a story that you can't really talk too much about because at the end of the day it's a sponsorship. Williams need money. It makes sense on all these levels. But I think it's going to be an interesting one for the first time in the hybrid era that Williams will have a different livery. And my money is on a white and red livery. So that's going to be a lot of fun. But now let's move on to probably one of the biggest ever Formula 2 reports. So welcome back to the F2 report. This is part of Let's Talk F1, so if you are watching this separately, that's because what I do after each week is I take out the F2 report from Let's Talk F1 and I put it in a separate video because I know some of you guys just want to see the Formula 2 news. Formula 1 news is everywhere, so you're interested in just Formula 2, so I do that separately. So I just thought I'd make that clear if you're watching this separately. But if you've been watching the whole of Let's Talk F1, let's just crack on with the news in Formula 2, starting off with the big story this week. The man on screen right there, son of Michael Schumacher, 7-time world champion, nephew of multiple Formula 1 race winner Ralf Schumacher. Mick Schumacher will be making his debut next year for Prima in Formula 2, the team he's driven for and won the Formula 3 World Championship this year, so history with the team. Ferrari's sort of junior team, Prima, have been historically fantastic news, not only for Mick Schumacher, but also for Formula 2. It's another fantastic young talent coming into the sport. I'll talk about in a minute his actual talent. I think that's something that I think shouldn't be overlooked at this sort of stage in his career, but it's fantastic to see the Schumacher name back in racing. Obviously, of late, there's not been much positive news coming out of the Schumacher camp. The fact that he won the Euro F3 world title this year was something incredible. And in just his second year of Formula 3 to win the world championship against drivers such as Dan Ticktum, who is rated so highly amongst many motorsport fans, is a fantastic achievement. But here's the but. He It's hard to say with Mick Schumacher. Obviously, a lot of drivers find their feet in Formula 2, and that's really, in my opinion, where you can work out if a driver's really got that star quality or if they've just been able to position themselves correctly in lower formulas. And what I mean by that is Schumacher was in the Prima team, which in Euro F3 were the best team. He also didn't have the best, let's say, roster of drivers around him. Apart from Dan Ticktum and a few others, there wasn't, I suppose, many incredible talents in Formula 3 this year. However, I will come clean, it's not a series I religiously watch, so that might be something that I've got a little bit wrong there. However, he comes into Formula 2 with a team that have had a difficult year this year, Prima, but have a lot of talent within that team, have a lot of history, and I think it's a perfect place to set up Mick Schumacher for next year. And if I'm being honest, I don't want to ride the hype train. I think that's why I'm being a little bit cautious. I don't want to ride the hype train this early because it is too early to tell. For sure, it is too early to tell. At the beginning of last year, many people said, Jack Aitken, he's going to be in the fight for the title in F2. Ended up nowhere near. His teammate went on and won it. But Jack Aitken himself had a difficult year. So it's going to be hard to tell with Schumacher next year. That is for sure. His teammate is going to be Sean Gelael. So Sean Gelael is now confirmed to be staying at Prima for next year. So it's going to be an interesting dynamic there. Because Gelael has had 3 years in Formula 2 now, has had those few sort of testing runs with Toro Rosso. We spoke about it earlier on in this episode of Let's Talk F1. I know, if you're not watching this episode, you won't be aware, but this week he did testing in Abu Dhabi for Toro Rosso, so he's been their sort of test driver, but he's definitely not one of those drivers who I can see breaking into Formula 1 at all, if I'm being totally honest. And that's no disrespect to Sean Gelael, but he's just not that Formula 1 calibre. So I think if Mick Schumacher is comfortably beating Gelael, that's target number 1. For sure, that's target number 1. And I think in your first year of Formula 2, if you can do that, that's fine. I think it's that second year of Formula 2 where you need to make that step. We see drivers now like Nicholas Latifi, Sergio Sette Camara, who've had a couple of years in Formula 2, Nick De Vries even, all going into their third years of Formula 2, and it's starting to look like, okay, they're goodish drivers in Formula 2, but are they good enough to make that jump? And really, I think in your third season of Formula 2, if you're not then smashing it then, you won't ever make the jump. You see Artem Markelov this year, he's not going to be doing Formula 2. He's not taking part anymore. So that's a bit of news, I suppose, for the Formula 2 report. Artem Markelov won't be returning to Formula 2 next year, which extremely limits his chances to get into Formula 1. And arguably, he should have had a go at some point. So, again, he's done testing this week for Renault in Formula 1, but never a race drive. You know, he was in big contention for that Williams seat last year, but didn't quite get it. Sergei Sorokin, his fellow Russian, got it. So, look, there's always a chance these guys could get into Formula 1. Mick Schumacher, what do I think about him? He's got the potential. For sure he's got the potential. You don't win Euro F3 without having some skill, some talent. And I think he won 4 or 5 races in a row. I mean, that's a lot of skill from a man at such a young age who's gone through such a lot. So, I think partnered with his name, which I don't want to be a factor, but it will be a factor, I think he will make it into Formula 1 eventually. I do. And I think if you look at the talent in F2 next year, which arguably has been culled quite a bit, because they've all gone up to Formula 1, Albon, Norris and George Russell are all going to Formula 1 next year. So you then start to question, well, who's going to be in that title fight next year? Will it be the likes of Nick De Vries? Will it be the likes of Mick Schumacher? Will Sergio Sette Camara find a bit of form? All these questions. Will Jack Aitken really settle in his second year? So that's going to be really fascinating to watch next year. But Schumacher, I think, has the potential to do well. But I also think, a little bit like Stoffel Van Dorn, a little bit like Jack Aitken, I think, give him a couple of years. Don't judge him on his first season. I would say that. And most of the championships Schumacher has been to, hasn't impressed in his first season, but that second year, give him a year to embed himself into a team, into a car, surroundings. That second year, judge him. I think that's a fair statement. And also as well, in 2020 for Formula 1, it looks like seats are going to be very scarce. So don't expect to see him in Formula 1 soon. But 2021, I would not rule it out. I really wouldn't. When Kimi Raikkonen leaves Sauber, there'll be a seat there. I can see him ending up there. I really can. So in a couple of years' time, come back to this video and you might have seen a crazy prediction that has just gone right. But I think if everything lines up for Mick Schumacher, I can see him making that jump in a few years' time because he is good. I don't want to jump on the hype train too much. I definitely don't see him in Formula 1 next year. I'm being 100% on it. Well, 2020, you know what I mean. I don't see him doing Formula 1 straight after his first season of Formula 2. But then again, I could be completely wrong. This guy could jump into a Formula 2 car and smash it straight away. But the truth is, we won't know until that very first race of the season, which I believe, once again, is in Bahrain next year. But that is yet to be confirmed. The F2 calendar has not fully come out yet. Right, there's more driver announcements than just Mick Schumacher. Obviously, I spoke about Sean Gelael. He has been confirmed that he'll be staying with Prema for next season. We also have Nick De Vries. Now, Nick De Vries, former McLaren young driver. Lots of rumours that if he beat Lando Norris this year, he would get that seat ahead of Norris. Norris beat him. Norris is in the McLaren next year. So, Nick De Vries, what sort of position is he in at the moment? If you ask me, a very tricky one. A very tricky one. He's had 2 years of Formula 2 now. Second season, much better than his first for sure. But going back to ART where he did his first season, a few question marks. A few question marks on whether he'll be able to make that jump to be world champion. I'm not too sure. I've never quite been 100% sure on Nick De Vries because some weekends he is fire. He is absolute fire. Other weekends you forget he's even in the sport. So again, that could just be me being a bit naive, but he's someone with talent. And I think next year, again, it looks like the talent pool isn't quite there. I know we still have the majority of seats available. So, you know, we could still have some big announcements of young drivers coming in. But it's going to be an interesting one. And I think this year, the one coming up, Nick De Vries is a big year for him. And it's probably his best chance at a world championship, in my eyes anyway, unless he becomes one of these F2 veterans and keeps on going until he wins the world championship. I don't see that happening. If I'm being honest, 100% I can see him going to Formula E. I can see that happening. With some of the Formula E boys, they're getting on a bit now. Formula E itself is going through a bit of a regeneration, if you will, bringing in lots of young talent. We've seen the likes of Antonio Fuoco doing testing. Obviously, Maximilian Gunther, in his first year of Formula 2 this year, is going over to Formula E with the Dragon team. So I think De Vries will probably be better suited to Formula E rather than Formula 1. Well, better suited, I mean, that's a more realistic chance of him going more to Formula E than it is to Formula 1. I know there's lots of Nick De Vries fans out there. I don't want to poo-poo on him, but I think a lot of you would agree that he definitely has the potential to get into Formula 1, but I don't think he has the potential to be a world champion, and I think it'll be more the route of maybe Alex Albon, Sergei Sorokin, that sort of route to F1, rather than a clean-cut George Russell, Charles Leclerc, Stoffel Van Dorn route into Formula 1, where they were touted as future world champions. So that's my sort of thinking behind that, but he will be at ART. Also confirmed at ART is Nikita Mazepin. Now, Nikita Mazepin, you might not know who he is. If you do, you'll know in the summer of this season, Force India went into administration, and Nikita Mazepin and his father, similarly to Lance Stroll and his father, Nikita Mazepin and the Mazepin family and the business and the group went in to buy that team, looking to put Nikita in a Formula 1 race seat next year. Obviously, things didn't quite go to plan. It's safe to say things didn't quite go to plan. He ended up not winning the title in GP3, just lost out on the title, and so he doesn't have enough super license points anyway. So it doesn't even matter if his dad had bought out the team. He doesn't have enough super license points, so he's going to have to wait. He's made the logical step up to Formula 2. ART, a solid team, obviously had the Drivers' World Champion this year, and I believe came second in the Constructors' Championship. So again, it's a logical step for Mazepin to try and, suppose, build his way to Formula 1 if possible. At the beginning of the year, I was sceptical, especially with the Force India stories. He actually tested for Force India in the Barcelona tests all the way back in February of this year. He's a very, well, on the surface, he looks like a paid driver. He really does. But he has put in some solid results. He really has. I believe he's got 4 wins this year in GP3. So it's not as if he's been nowhere. But at the same time, you'd like to think if you win in GP3, maybe when you make the step up to F2, it's not going to be comfortable. So if you're not winning GP3, a few question marks, maybe. But it's a driver that I think has potential, again, like all of the drivers in Formula 2, and I'm looking forward to seeing him in Formula 2 next season. Right, the final confirmed signing for next year is actually an ex-Formula 2 driver, someone who drove a couple of years ago and actually won races, and I thought was very unlucky to not get a seat in Formula 2 this year, but he is back. It is Nobuharu Matsushita. Now, I've not picked the best photo, so apologies, it's not the best photo. He doesn't look very happy, but he's a solid driver. He is a solid driver. Again, I don't think he's a Formula 1 superstar. I really don't see that, but he's a solid Formula 2 driver. He's moving to Carlin next year, the team's champion this year, and I think will be a suitable replacement to Lando Norris. And it looks like Sergio Sette Camara will be leaving Carlin, so I really like this appointment from Carlin. Right, I don't want to keep you guys here too much longer, but Formula 2 testing was today, very similar to Formula 1 testing this week. It's a waste of time tasting session, but it gives us an idea of where drivers will be going to next season. I'm going to list all the drivers that have made changes during this test. This is no way a confirmation on any of these drivers being in Formula 2 next year or driving for these respective teams, but after day one, we saw many drivers new to Formula 2 and making changes teams-wise, so I think it'll be interesting to go through because most likely these will stick when the season comes around back in 2019, starting with one of who I think is one of the hottest prospects in Formula 2 next year, if he ends up joining, and that is Callum Ilott. Ferrari Driver Academy, young driver, British racer. British race got nothing to do with it, but this guy has the speed. He has the speed. Didn't quite get the GP3 World title, but he knows how to drive a car, and I'm really interested to see what he can do in Formula 2 next year if he joins. He was testing for Charouz. We then have Lucas Giotto. He moves back to Russian time by the look of it. I really liked Lucas Giotto when he was driving for Russian time, and I was very surprised that they actually got rid of him last year, and I believe he moved to MP Motorsport, I want to say. So it's really nice to see him back at Russian time, who themselves are going through a bit of a change for next year, so I doubt they will be called Russian time, but for now they are called Russian time. Also, we have Louis Delatraz also driving for Carlin. So Delatraz and Matsushita, I think, will be an interesting mix at Carlin. Not too sure if it's as strong as Camara and Norris. I'd be pretty comfortable in saying it's not, but it's not an awful one. Just want to note as well, Ilott did finish below Mazepin. So if I rate Ilott highly, what's that saying about Mazepin? I just particularly quite like Callum Ilott, and I think with his age, he's going to have a solid year next year. But again, it's complete randomness at this stage with a lot of these guys. We've then got Tatiana Calderon for Charouz. Now, this was a strange one. She's obviously test driver for Sauber in Formula 1. Sauber in Formula 1 have their links, obviously, to Ferrari, and I can see that sort of boiling up there, and that'll be a really nice sort of thing to see is another woman in Formula 2. Calderon, at the moment, looks like she could be on her way to the W Series, but I hope that she goes to Formula 2. I really do hope that. I think the W Series, at the moment, is a bit of a sore thumb. If you will, I think it's a short-term fix for a long-term problem. So I hope Calderon makes the right decision and goes to Formula 2, but that's just my opinion. Anyway, then we've got Sergio Sette Camara going for Dams. big fan of Dams as a team. When I first started really getting into Formula 2, it was Ollie Rowland who was there. Really wanted Ollie Rowland to win that season. He didn't quite, but since then I've had a little love, I suppose, for Dams. And Camara, again, really like that guy. The closest Brazilian to Formula 1 these days as well, so it'll be interesting to see if he can have a push next year after a few wins this year and last year. Then we have Correa going to MP Motorsport and GP3 World Champion Anthony Hubert. He and Correa are at MP Motorsport. Then we have Yuzu racing for Russian time alongside what we think will be Luca Giotto. Then we have Tavita for Trident, Ralph Aron for Campos, Mariano Sato for Campos. That'll be an interesting one to watch out for, the young Japanese driver. Then we have Pulcini. I think he finished 4th in GP3 for Trident. Then we have Laurent and Ralph Boschung for Arden. That's a lot of names. That's a lot of names to get your head round. But for me, the big ones today, Mick Schumacher. He makes his debut, or will be making his debut in Formula 2 next season. Nick De Vries is going to be trying to really cement a title fight. We've also got the likes of Jack Aitken, who isn't in any of the testing at the moment, but I'm 100% sure will come back next year in Formula 2. So a lot to watch out for in Formula 2 for next season. But obviously, once again, Mick Schumacher, the big news, he'll be in Formula 2 next season. So that's it for another week of Let's Talk F1. We actually got quite a few bits this week, which is quite interesting considering this is the first week of the winter of Formula 1. But I'm slowly starting to put this schedule together now, and at the weekend I will do a video announcing the full schedule over the weeks. But I really like either a Wednesday or a Thursday for Let's Talk F1. I think that works quite well, so that'll be probably in that same slot for quite some time, because then I can put up the F2 report on a Friday as well. I think it all works quite nicely. But as always, I'd love to know your thoughts. Schumacher, that is a big one in Formula 2. Williams as well. I'm a big fan of liveries. And of course, Alex Albon going to Toro Rosso, and the big driver swaps all over the grid. Sainz to McLaren. Ricciardo, we didn't get to see him. Gasly, we got to see him at Red Bull. And of course, the big one, the man on the thumbnail, Charles Leclerc, making his test debut for Ferrari. Thank you guys for watching as always as well. If you're new around here, Formula 1 and Formula E goodness on this channel. So if you enjoy that, why not hit that subscribe button, and the bell as well always helps for both me and yourself to watch all of that goodness. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you in the next one.